This is a great privilege and a real opportunity for me, and I think I speak for Chris as well, to help moderate this debate today, and we're honored to be here. I wanted to give you just a little background. As you know, this was something to really put together, and for the Utah League of Cities and Towns, they deserve a real round of applause and a lot of credit for making this happen and putting this together. Huge effort. And because of scheduling conflicts and anticipating that, this traditional debate, they thought it might not come together. So the League of Cities and Towns submitted 5 key questions to Governor Herbert, so his thoughts could be shared in what was thought would be his absence, along with those of Mike Weinholtz, who was scheduled to be here. Mr. Weinholtz was also supplied the same 5 questions. Thankfully, this debate did come together, and Governor Herbert and Mike Weinholtz, thank you so much for making the extraordinary effort to be here today. But obviously, because the candidates have seen the first 5 key questions, we wanted to just make sure that you know that is not part of the traditional debate format that we would normally do. But so much good work had already been done. We are going to ask, Chris and myself will ask those 5 key questions, and then we are going to turn things over to you. We have microphones that are strategically placed, and we would encourage those of you here in maybe 15, 20 minutes to start queuing up at the microphones, because those are the critical questions. We want to hear from our Utah's cities and towns, and from those who have particular concerns they want to pass along to those who wish to either continue to be our governor or be our next governor. And then, of course, Chris, I know, has questions. I have questions. We'll go from there. Very quickly, the governor won the coin toss, which means that he will have the first and last word today. He will get opening statement, and he will get the last of the closing statements, which is traditional in a debate format. There will be 2-minute opening comments from each of the candidates. Then we will go to the questions, the 5 that I mentioned, and then many more, hopefully. If the candidate needs to take the entire 2 minutes, they certainly may. We have timers that are in front of the candidates. We also have cards that will be held up, and the green card means there's a minute to go. The yellow card means there's 30 seconds to go. The red card means it's time to wrap things up pretty darn quick. And then, if one of our candidates feels after the second response that a rebuttal is absolutely necessary, we will accommodate that for them for 30 seconds, and then we will accommodate a response to the rebuttal for 30 seconds. But hopefully that won't happen often. So we'll probably just get underway, and Chris, let's have the governor give the first opening statement of 2 minutes. Governor.
Well, thank you, Doug and Chris. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that the podium is tilted to the right. I don't know if that's because in deference to you, Doug, or because of my political persuasion, but I'm honored to be here with all of you today, mayors and council members. I recognize, as Ken said, where the rubber meets the road. You are on the front lines of the successes we're having in our state today. And I appreciate the fact because I was there with you, spending 14 years as a local government official and county government, again, working with many of you side by side in the challenges of the day. When I came into office here 7 years ago, we found ourselves in a big challenge. We were the depths of the Great Recession, a unique time in our state's history, the worst economic times since the Great Depression. But like the Utah way that we have here, we banded together, we rolled up our sleeves, and we went to work. And we found ways to say we can, in fact, become better economically. In fact, let's set a goal to become the best in America. And by us working together, by having tax reform and having regulation reform, by empowering the private sector, by having efficiency in state and local government, we've created the most business-friendly environment in America today. And new numbers just came out today. Our unemployment rate, one of the lowest in the nation, at 3.7%. Our job growth creation at 3.5%, about double the national average. Our impoverished people, those who live in below the poverty level, are 1/3 now the national average. So the results that we've been able to create here working together are phenomenal. We have a vision for going forward in the future. We can build upon what we've done and, in fact, raise our sights and do things even better over the next 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. By the way, one correction. Apparently, the coin toss was done before I got here, and apparently the governor chose first to open here, and then, Mr. Weinholtz, you chose to have the last word at the end of the debate. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that. Mr. Weinholtz, your 2 minutes.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you to the League of Cities and Towns, not only for hosting this debate, but I'm very impressed by this wonderful convention that you have with the opportunity to learn from each other and development opportunities. It's a very successful model in business, and I'm thrilled to see you using it here, always helping each other. I'd like to use this time to introduce myself because I'm a first-time candidate and certainly not as well known as Governor Herbert. But before retiring to run for governor, I've been a CEO in business for nearly 30 years. I've started and run businesses of all different sizes and created thousands of jobs in those businesses. I have a proven track record as an experienced leader, but despite my successful business career, I started out in a very different way. I'm a third-generation factory worker. I worked in the same factories as my grandfather and my dad did before deciding to go to night school, and I could only go at night, taking a couple courses at a time, so it took me 8 years to finish my college degree, but that's how important it was to me, and I wouldn't be standing here today without that education. And so I know how important education is to our children and our families, and that's one of the things I'm sure we'll talk about today. The business opportunity that my family and I moved here for nearly 20 years ago was a company called CHG Healthcare. It's the largest physician staffing company in the United States with over $1 billion in annual revenue. The two success drivers of CHG were the implementation of a core value called putting people first, which means we put the needs of our people first in every decision-making process, and also the adoption of a philosophy called servant leadership, which means we're here to help others succeed. And that's the kind of partner that you can expect in me, the kind who puts you first and who is always looking to partner and give local control. So thank you.
Thanks to both of you. Given the venue for this debate, our questions will focus on issues of critical importance to cities and towns. The first question involves our population growth. Utah's population is set to grow more than double in the next 30 years. How will you lead the state of Utah in preparation for this explosive growth? Governor, why don't you take that first?
Well, the population growth that you're anticipating is already here. We are in a fast growth mode now, third fastest growing state in America today. And clearly, we have to anticipate the growth. It's happening because we have a great quality of life. People like to come here to Utah because of our principles, our values. And there's also economic opportunity. So to get a job is a good place to come to Utah. And so that's fueling people to come to the great state of Utah. And we have the highest birth rate in the nation. So all those three items conspire to have a dramatic increased growth in population. We are already investing in transportation and education. We're taking a look at the water. Water is the only limiting factor to growth, in fact, in the state of Utah, and it's a top-of-mind issue for us. We also did Your Utah, Your Future. We actually did the largest grassroots polling of any time in the history of our country, where people actually had to answer a questionnaire. Our Envision Utah people helped put that on. 53,000 respondents asking, we the people of Utah, here's our future. What do you want it to be? What do you want government's involvement? What should the private sector do? How about transportation? How about education? Those are helping us shape the future and the policies that we need to put in place. Again, we have an opportunity, in fact, to continue to grow economically. Again, you cannot have a good quality of life if you don't have a good job. And certainly, we're only as happy as our children and our grandchildren. So they need to have economic opportunity too. So the focus over these next few years, when it looks to the growth of Utah, is to continue to have a good environment for economic growth and expansion. which again, the best in the nation, most diversified in the nation today, and also to make sure that the rising generation has education skills to compete in the marketplace of tomorrow, which is now global in nature. So investing in our future is what we're doing right now, and I feel very good about our future opportunities.
Mr. Weinholtz, same question for you. How do we prepare for the population growth we expect over the next 30 years?
Well, first of all, it takes a long-term vision. And as a CEO for the past 30 years, I have expertise in creating a long-term vision at the same time balancing the current needs. But the immediate needs can't take over the need for long-term investment. And that's what happens all too often in government, where we worry about year-to-year budgets without a longer-term vision, without a 10-year or longer plan for education. So my plan would focus on 5 main areas to accommodate the explosive growth that we're experiencing. First would be on infrastructure and city planning. Second would be job creation and economic development, clean air and water, healthcare, and education. Particularly on economic development, we need to make sure that we're attracting the right kind of companies to come here to Utah. I know what those look like because I created one. Not just companies that are rapid growth, but companies that take care of their employees, provide living wage, great pay and benefits, but also that are good stewards and good community citizens. So we need to do more of that, and we need to bring progressive companies. We need more $10,000 a month jobs as opposed to the $10 an hour jobs that we have plenty of today. And I know how to create those. As it relates to education, we need to get serious about funding our education needs. My friend Scott Anderson, who I served on the board of the United Way of Salt Lake with for 10 years, wrote a very inspiring op-ed this week in the Deseret News talking about the need to invest more in our children's education. You know, we're falling behind. The governor talks about increased funding that he's done, but we're still not back to pre-recession levels, and we need to get serious about funding our children's education.
We thank you both for your responses, and again, if anybody does feel the necessity of a rebuttal, just let me know with a raised finger. Let me ask this question. Accommodating the growth is one thing, and preparing for a huge number of people to join us here in the state of Utah, either through natural growth or immigration. What should be done now, especially, as we look toward that future and we want to preserve the quality of life that we all enjoy today in the state of Utah, the outdoor opportunities, the cultural things that we cherish and enjoy? How do we preserve those while accommodating the growth and planning for the future? Mr. Weinholtz, we'll start with you first.
Well, our unparalleled quality of life has a lot to do with our public lands. And our public lands are our home and our heritage and what we leave behind for our children and future generations. You know, I want to make sure that the places where I taught my son to fish and hike and camp are the same places that he can take his children in the future. And if we sell off our public lands the way Governor Herbert has planned to do, we're going to lose our heritage. And we just simply cannot do that. As governor, I'll ensure greater protection of our public lands, advocate for greater awareness and protection of our air, water, and world-class tourist destinations. And speaking of world-class tourist destinations, the other reason to protect these public lands is because tourism and recreation is such a huge part of the Utah economy. And if we sell off these public lands, we'll lose the opportunity for ourselves and our children and future generations to use those pristine lands for recreation and tourism. And those are things that continue to drive our economy, and they're important enough. Also, studies show that federally managed, the communities around federally managed government lands do much better when they are federally managed. The cost of managing these lands is something far beyond what we could handle as a state. So we need to preserve these lands. We need to get serious about the fact that they belong to all of us and stop villainizing the federal government at every turn, suing the federal government, spending tens of millions of dollars to do so. We just need to protect these lands for our children, and that'll protect our heritage.
Governor Herbert, your response.
Well, let me just correct Mr. Weinholtz. First off, I've never suggested selling off the public lands. That's not true. I've said we are a public land state. We'll always be a public land state. The question is who's going to manage them. And the management that we've found with the federal government has left us come up short a little bit. We've lost a complete lumber industry in the southern part of our state, for example, because hard to believe we cannot spray for the bark beetle in our forests. We've lost the forest and the lumber industry, and now we just have a fire hazard out there. We have cheatgrass that burns like a fuse. When we have our wildland fires, they need to be replaced with more fire-resistant grasses. We can't get the federal government to do that. We can't even go out and do controlled burns in our forest services so we can scarf out the underbrush and make the forest more healthy. So it's about management. It's not about selling them off or privatizing them. That's just not true. Let me just say to you, too, that's a republic. And I would suggest that we get out and talk to the people in the 29 counties and find out what's happening in their backyards. It's not what we think in Salt Lake City, it's what they think down in San Juan County or Kane County or St. George or other parts that are impacted dramatically by having the public lands in the backyards, and say, what is the best way to manage them? Now, we have a Utah Your Future I just mentioned because we wanted to have the people of Utah weigh in. It's a republic. We should represent their views and what they think we should do as elected officials. It's not a dictatorship, it's a republic. And so we have got good information as far as what we should be in fact doing. I'll just give you an example of that. In Southern Utah County, when I was a county commissioner, we had tremendous growth taking place there. We created what's called Nebo Vision, where those south of Provo and Springville worked together and said, let's make sure we plan our roads so that we have them actually come together. Let's plan and anticipate that so we can have more efficiency, more cost effectiveness when we build roads. That's collaboration, that's cooperation, that's what we should see as we vision to the future of Utah.
Could I exercise just a little prerogative? We got into federal lands, the rural areas. What can be done within our urban areas to maintain the quality of life and make it pleasant to live along the Wasatch Front? And again, I'll go to Mr. Weinholtz first on this. And if we could keep this one to a minute or less.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can improve public transportation to start with. And then we also, because we know that the quality of our air is most impacted in our urban areas, we need to get serious about cleaning up our air. Every time I've heard a politician, or unfortunately even a business person, talk about the need to clean up the air, they always say, well, we need to clean up the air, but we can't do it at the expense of jobs. And I think those things are mutually exclusive. We can, in fact, if we move towards next generation energy sources like wind and solar and geothermal, we can create thousands of jobs in those industries, and we can retrain coal miners and other folks in rural areas to compete for those jobs. So that's one of the main areas that we can do in the cities.
Governor Herbert.
I've never heard anybody in 7 years of being a governor of this great state say we cannot clean up the air at the expense of business. I think they need to work in tandem. They need to work together because business has been part of the problem. We've passed 31 rules here in the last 2 years impacting commercial business and industry to make them reduce their pollution. And along the Wasatch Front here, which you asked the question, I don't think we were on the right topic, is we've reduced pollution along the Wasatch Front by 35% over the last 10 years, in spite of the fact we have 350,000 more people call Utah home on the Wasatch Front. We are making significant progress. Are we where we want to be? No. We have more to do, and we will do it. But when it comes back to your question on what can we do with the public lands, watershed restoration. We've spent now hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably millions of dollars now, on watershed restoration to make sure that our watersheds are protected, which is the lifeblood of the valleys here. Not only that, we have the mountain accord. We're trying to find out how do we balance the use of the public lands next to our cities so we can, in fact, be responsible and have those native plants and flora and fauna that we all enjoy and go out and fishing, as Mr. Weinholtz has suggested.
Thank you both. The next question is involving infrastructure, and particularly how we pay for it. The Utah legislature in 2015 passed HB 362, which was an historic investment in state and local transportation. The primary tools in this legislation were a modification to the motor fuel tax and a local option sales tax. As transportation options continue to shift to alternative energy vehicles, biking, walking, etc., how should the state of Utah modernize transportation revenue sources to match the broader array of transportation options?
Well, I'm a big believer in local control. I've been there, understand some of the challenges that you face as mayors and council members as far as how do you implement the programs you want to have and do you have the resources necessary to do it with. Under our Constitution, you've been given authority on land use, zoning, which you have the ability to control and direct. So how you develop your cities is under your domain. The revenue stream, you have authorization on property tax, you have sales tax, and as a former county commissioner who worked very hard to get a sales tax for the counties that we didn't participate in, again, I understand the difficulty that you have in local government of being able to control your own destiny with the tools you've been given. So the local option sales tax was one that the legislature came up with, which was designed to help you have an augmentation to your existing revenue stream by vote of the people. Some passed it, some did not. Again, I think that opportunity still is out there. I also know how significantly important it is for us to make sure that we maintain the B and C road funds. Again, it seems like that's something that the legislature occasionally wants to pick at and maybe change the formula. But I, again, as a local government guy, know how important those B and C road funds are to our counties and our cities. We need to make sure that that continues. Now, we passed legislation here that's created a little bit of a problem between the cities and the counties. Unintended consequences. We understand that phrase very well with our legislature. And I know that we have our administration, our Department of Transportation, working with counties and with the cities to see if we can reconcile and resolve that problem. I'm here to tell you today, if we can get that resolved, I'm more than happy to call a special session to get resolution to that conflict that passed this past legislative session. At the end of the day, you need to decide what's in your best interest for your communities. And the state should be a helper, a facilitator, a partner, not a dictator, but one that will work hand in hand with you to make sure you get the right results that you want to have as elected officials.
Mr. Weinholtz, same question for you. How do we fund transportation going forward?
Well, I agree with Governor Herbert that it needs to be local solutions. And as someone who has run large businesses with very distributed operations in all 50 states, multiple offices, and that philosophy of servant leadership, helping all those people succeed rather than dictating to them, I can tell you that it's always better to make those decisions closer to where the rubber hits the road. So I agree with Governor Herbert on that. But how do we go about doing it? You know, I would support a larger percentage of the local option sales taxes going to the cities and counties rather than to the UTA until we can see that they are beginning to improve their operations. And I think this is an area where Governor Herbert has failed to lead out on modern transit. You know, the UTA continues to struggle. We need smarter options, local planning, and revenue sources that address the differences between our very unique Utah cities and towns.
Thank you. Governor,
Yeah, let me
you'd
just
like to
clarify.
rebut that?
The UTA, our biggest transit authority, I have one appointment. It's a special service district. It's not something that the state runs, even though it has Utah on the front of the name. It's not a Utah agency. But the Utah Transit Authority has brought in hundreds of millions of dollars in transit. It may not be enough. They've been recognized as one of the best managed transit authorities in America. And we certainly have had some problems out there with their administration, and it's caused some issues. My one appointment, David H. Burton, has done a great job in following the audit and bringing things back into place. But don't forget, there's been hundreds of millions of dollars spent on transit in this state, and our transit, our bus rapid transit, our light rail, our heavy rail are improving dramatically and certainly going to be a part of the future when it comes to transportation.
Okay, apparently there's no response to the rebuttal. Let me ask this question, and this has been something that has been an issue in the state of Utah since the days of Governor Leavitt. I can remember having conversations with him about this as online purchases became more and more popular. And many of these online businesses are based right here in the state of Utah. The idea of the sales taxes associated with that. To both of you, as governor, how would you deal with this issue? And what about the Remote Transactions Fairness Act? And we start this time with, is it Governor Herbert that we start with? I'm not,
You're in charge.
Mr. Weinholtz this time. Sorry, I got thrown by the rebuttal and the lack of a rebuttal to the rebuttal. So Mr. Weinholtz, you.
So on this issue, this is about the internet sales tax. And I support programs to collect sales tax on internet purchases. We've seen studies that show that we are missing out on the opportunity to collect over $100 million a year in these types of sales taxes. And imagine what we could do with another $100 million in education or transportation. Now, this isn't a new law. This just enables us to collect sales taxes because today the law is in place, but we don't have the mechanisms in place to collect those sales taxes on internet purchases. And Representative McKell proposed this bill, and I think he very wisely set limits on it so that it doesn't hurt micro businesses who sell things from their home via the internet. So, but we can't continue to avoid, or we can't continue to miss the opportunity to collect hundreds of millions of dollars in sales tax when we're struggling every year to fund all the great programs we need for our growing state.
Governor Herbert.
We probably don't have a lot of difference on this. Let me just give you the updated numbers, Mike. We're losing about $200 million a year because of taxes owed on remote sales, which have not owed but not collected. It's the Remote Sales Parity Act, actually, that Congressman Chaffetz is sponsoring, that's designed on a federal level to fix the problem. That's where it needs to be fixed, is at the federal level. I gave in my State of the States address here this past year, as chairman of the National Governors Association, I said, Congress, you got to quit kicking the can down the road, fix the problem. Under the concept of lowering the rate and broadening the base, this goes contrary to that. And it's not good tax policy, and it's certainly not fair. We have our brick and mortar people who go out there and risk and put a lot of money into it, have people come and do their window shopping and then buy on a remote sale to some place that does not collect the sales tax, and we, the people of Utah, are disenfranchised on money that's owed to us. So it's a matter of fairness, it's a matter of good tax policy, and again, the proposal with our state legislature is, if we get it back, we can give everybody a tax cut. We can invest it into roads, we can invest it into education. There's just a lot of things we can do with an extra $200 million which are owed and not collected. So my hope is, it goes back to the Mike Leavitt days. This has been an ongoing argument. That's why I said to Congress, I called them out and said, look, you got to quit kicking it down the road. Let's solve this problem. Congressman Chaffetz is making, I think, a significant effort, the National Governors Association, in a bipartisan effort to get this thing resolved, and let's hope Congress acts.
If I might just ask a quick follow-up. Is it an effort in futility for the state of Utah then? We can pass laws, we can do all kinds of things. Until the federal government acts, are we at such an extreme disadvantage that we are toothless? What should we do to enforce this in the meantime? Mr. Weinholtz.
Well, as the governor has said, this is a federal issue, and I applaud his efforts to try to get Congress to address it. But there are always local solutions, and I believe that Representative McKell's efforts to do so would be a first step while we're waiting for the federal government to act. So there's always a local solution, and I applaud the legislature's efforts to try to find one while we're waiting for the federal government to act.
Governor Herbert.
Well, I don't know if there's always a local solution. We certainly want to try it, and that's what we're trying to do in the legislature. But what we're trying to do is force a lawsuit. Talk about lawsuits. Sometimes you force a lawsuit so you can change policy and get a modification that you otherwise couldn't do, because it's the lever to get somebody to pay attention. The Supreme Court last year said, although they had passed a decision that said you cannot force another state to collect your taxes, they said now, because of technology, because of the ease of doing it now, the time may be right to bring this back to court. So the state solution really has been, not just Representative McKell, but Senator Bramble, is let's force a local solution. Somebody will take us to court, we'll go to court, it'll get to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has already signaled if it comes to us, we're going to overturn past decisions which prohibit the ability of states to collect taxes in behalf of another state. So that's the local solution, is to get us into court.
Okay. Thank you. I have one more question, and then we'll turn some time to the audience for questions. So please, if you have questions, there are microphones on the left and right. This next question is relevant to all that we've just been talking about, local government partnerships with state and federal government, the state and federal government. The local governments are the partner of the state of Utah in providing infrastructure and public services, planning for the future, and promoting our quality of life. However, more and more legislation arises each year that would strip local authority over land use and other decisions traditionally made at the municipal level. As governor, how would you promote and preserve local responsibility and local authority? Governor.
Well, again, having been there, done that, I understand the significant concern that we have of a state that mandates and dictates to you what you should do and how you should do it. And the irony of the whole thing, or maybe the hypocrisy, is that we also as a state rail against the federal government for doing the same thing to us that we as a state try to impose upon local government. So I feel your pain. I mean, I really do understand, and it's aggravating. I'll just tell you, I was at the legislature here a few years ago when I was a county commissioner, and I came up and I said to the leadership, leader in the Senate, I said, why do you do this to us? Why do you do this to us? And he looked at me just kind of in a wry smile, said, because we can. Now, I was not any more happy about that then as I am today. We need to be sensitive about these things and making sure that we give you opportunity to do what you need to do. Again, every area of the state of Utah is not the same. What may work in Mona may not work out in Grantsville. What may work in the north may not work in the south. We have different needs, different challenges. With the economy, again, we've got some of our states, our counties are too dependent upon energy. We need to diversify. You would know better how to diversify than the state. We ought to be your partner. We ought to be joined with you in a collaborative effort. The spirit of cooperation is what's going to solve the problems, not a dictation from on high. So, whatever your local ideas are, how you want to improve, make your quality of life better, economically, transportation, we want to help you. We have the Governor's Rural Partnership. Where's Spencer Cox, who chairs it for us, a rural guy. My past two lieutenant governors, and I hope I stopped at two here, both have been mayors. They understand the challenges of rural Utah. We want to be your partner and help you accomplish whatever your dreams and aspirations are for your community.
Mr. Weinholtz, same question for you.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about legislative intrusions into local municipalities. You know, examples like, you know, zoning and billboards should be handled locally. And I intend to promote and preserve local responsibility and authority by consistently asking the question, is this something that the state can handle, or is this something that the local authority, the local communities can handle? Just like I always ask the question in business, is this going to help our people? Is this going to put our people first? I would do the same thing here. Is this something that our local municipalities can handle? And if so, then the state needs to get out of the way on it. As far as the legislature saying they do it because they can, well, that's a lack of leadership. I mean, the legislature, I understand they're an independent body, but the governor has the opportunity to lead on these issues that he knows are important to cities and towns. And so we have to make sure that we have a governor who's willing to stand up to the legislature, negotiate with them, be partners with you, rather than just saying it's because they can do it. You know, I'm also concerned about unfunded mandates. You know, whether, you know, some recent examples are, you know, criminal justice reform without proper funding, body cameras for police officers without funding, indigent defense, and also the legislature interfering with local historic district designations. So again, Utah can't complain about federal overreach as a state if it's going to be implementing excessive controls over you folks. It's hypocrisy. So we need to lead out on this issue.
Governor, you'd like to
Yeah,
have a
Utah
rebuttal?
can and will complain every chance we get about federal overreach. This is a bipartisan issue. We find Democrats and Republicans alike, governors across this great land, saying the federal government is overreaching into the state domains, and we will complain. We'll push back as much as we can. Now, that being said, two wrongs don't make a right. The fact that the federal government is doing it to the state doesn't mean that the state should be doing it to local government. I get that, and I agree. But by golly, when we see a government's out of control with entitlement spending, that is spending 3 times more money now today in one government, the federal government, as the combined spending of all 50 states, there's too much overreach and too much getting inside of what is a state domain and a state right issue. We'd save money for the taxpayers. We'd have more effective and better services if we left it more to the states and to the cities and the counties to provide the services that the people want to have.
Mr. Weinholtz, do you have anything further to add on that? Anything you'd like to add to that topic?
Well, yeah. As the visiting team here, I would like to respond to that. You know, suing the federal government is always our first inclination and our first step. You know, and how do you expect to have a good relationship with the federal government if you're constantly suing them? The public lands issue is a great example. You know, our own attorneys told us that we can't win this lawsuit for the public lands. So what did we do? We went out and we shopped and shopped until we found a law firm that gave us the answer that we wanted. And we committed spending $14 million of our taxpayer money on a lawsuit that is absolutely unwinnable. And that's not only morally bankrupt, but it's fiscally irresponsible, and it's not the kind of thing that I would do as governor.
All right,
Can you rebut the rebut?
What's that?
Can you rebut the rebut?
I think we would allow it in the case that we don't have anyone at microphones.
And if I could just invite people, please do come forward. This is such
there
an
they are.
important part. All right, the brave souls are coming forward, and Governor, a rebuttal to the rebuttal.
Let me just again say the approach that Utah's taken has been basically with 3 arrows in the quiver. We try to negotiate. We've always tried to negotiate. That's the first and foremost thing we do. Then we try to pass legislation to direct and correct whatever problems are perceived there, and only as a last resort do we litigate. But they're all part and parcel of a comprehensive approach. You know, we ended up going and doing the Washington County lands deal. That was a negotiation originally, became legislation, had to have a threat of lawsuit because we ended up having people at the table who didn't negotiate in good faith that went back and tried to torpedo the legislation back in Washington, D.C. So all 3 arrows are in the quiver, and all 3 should be used judiciously.
Thank you. And again, a rebuttal to the rebuttal of the rebuttal of the rebuttal.
I think I'm rebuttaled out.
Okay. All right. Let's go to our microphones now, and let's start over here to my left. And if you'd identify yourself and where you're from.
Charles Wheeler, Hyde Park City. My question is with regard to federal lands management and this case that's so hot of a topic. Federal lands generate a certain amount of money. Should we take control, they would finance whatever control the state of Utah would oversee with, but that would not be enough money to manage these federal lands. How would you propose then to generate the funds to manage these federal lands appropriately and take care of the employees, people such as that currently work these federal lands? Thank you.
Thank you for your question from the Cache Valley, and Governor, we go to you.
Well, that's not what I'm recommending, so I'll let the governor answer that one.
Well, again, as I said earlier, we are a public land state. We'll always be a public land state. There's not a desire to privatize the lands. We have the ability, and there's a study done by University of Utah as well as Utah State University that said that we do have enough resources to come in if we don't have to share them with Washington, D.C. and the federal government to, in fact, manage our public lands. We manage everything else, you know, pretty well here in the state of Utah, and I certainly would put our management skills up against the federal government any day of the week. So yeah, we're listed as the best managed state in America. So we're doing something right, and I think that we can, in fact, get a better return on the taxpayers' dollars if we have more to say. Now, we've never proposed, taking away the national parks or the monuments or the wilderness areas, the recreation areas, all those things that we kind of utilize and enjoy, that would remain in the federal government's hands. But our ability to manage the public lands would be in some of these other areas that the federal government is really doing nothing. Certainly, when it comes to energy development, which I know my opponent doesn't particularly like to hear about, but whether you like it or not, the base load of energy in this country is going to come from carbon-based fuels and or nuclear power for the next generation to come. We have an opportunity, in fact, with technology to do it cleaner, to make it affordable, to make sure that we're good stewards of the earth. They're not mutually exclusive ideas as far as extraction industries as well as being stewards of the earth. And we can do that in ways that will at least save time. We have nearly 70% of our land mass is publicly owned land, for heaven's sake. That's a lot. And yet when we go to get a permit to drill a natural gas well or an oil well, it takes us up to 18 months to get it. If you're in North Dakota, if you're in Oklahoma, if you're in Texas, it takes you less than 3 months. Time is money. It puts us at a competitive disadvantage. So optimal management of the public lands is why we have a balanced resource committee chaired by my good friend Ted Wilson, a good Democrat, trying to find that optimal way to manage the public lands which benefits everybody.
Mr. Weinholtz, I took this out of order. I apologize. You are next.
No, it's fine. Well, I'd like to ask the question that that good people always ask in this situation: where are we going to get the money to do it? I was up in Box Elder County a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about the fires that we were having up in northern Utah, and the estimates were that it was going to cost $3 or $4 million as a result of those fires. And that was just one instance. We live in a desert. We live in a dry state, and so catastrophes like that can happen frequently. And if you're not financially planning for them, that's when you run into trouble. But the federal government spends hundreds of millions of dollars managing these lands. So I don't know where we're going to get the money to do it. And studies have shown that when these lands are managed federally, that the communities that surround them do better. If you talk to the folks in Moab or any of the other areas of Utah that are driven by tourism and recreation, they want these lands continue to be managed by the federal government. And just like I did in my business career, I always default by asking what the people want.
Thanks to both of you.
Well, and we know what the people want, particularly those who live next to public lands. They want to have a balanced approach. They want to have input. They want to have a say in what happens in their own backyard. We understand they're public lands. We're not trying to take them back. That's a misnomer put out there by enemies of this attempt to have a better management practice in place. It's a matter of what is the optimal. It's not one versus the other. It's not exclusive one to the other. We want to have tourism and travel. We want to have a robust agricultural business. Our animal units are being taken away from us on the federal land. Water rights are being taken away from us on the federal land. So we need to protect our agriculture, our tourism and travel, which is certainly a big part of our growing economy, as well as our extraction industries, which includes energy. There's a balanced way to approach this where we have tried to negotiate to find that optimal point, led in a bipartisan way, and yet we keep having people pull out and threaten to sue us, and so we end up having to say, well, we'll sue you. That's not really as productive a way as we can, but we can in fact find that optimal point if we work together and listen to the people, particularly the people of Utah, which is who we're running to represent.
A chance for a response.
Well, again, the governor didn't answer the question of how we're going to pay for it, but it's almost a moot point, because these lawsuits against the federal government regarding taking back the public land, and by the way, that's the nomenclature, that's the language that the people are using to fire people up, take back our lands. Well, they're already our lands. They're Utahns' lands, they're America's lands, and getting everybody fired up over this hatred we have of the federal government is not productive, it's not helpful, and we can't afford it. And by the way, it's moot because the lawsuit is unwinnable. There's this thing called the supremacy clause that people like to overlook whenever they're suing the federal government on this issue. And our own lawyers told us that this was unwinnable. So you have to have a long-term vision, And that vision should include continuing to partner with the federal government to manage these lands because they do it well, and they do it in a way where our local communities can benefit from it.
Thank you. We'd like to give our next attendee a chance to ask a question over here on the right.
Thank you. My name is Steve Fairbanks. I'm a council person in Sandy City and a past president of the League of Cities and Towns. We have alluded here today, you have alluded to the importance of local control, and that really is a serious issue with this group. We're the people who provide the services, we're the people who take the complaints, and we're the level of government that really impacts people's lives. So it's important to us to have the ability to do what our citizens would like us to do and what our community needs. Now, in light of your alluding to this value, would you commit to supporting our needs for local control and be our champion on the Hill? We recognize that you're the administration and not the legislation, but we need someone to stand for us when the legislation gets out of control. Could we count on you, even to the point of veto, to support our local control?
Governor, that's for you first.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Councilman. Absolutely. Again, it would be a rare situation indeed that I would have a legislation that would trump local control. It would have to be a private property right violation, civil right violation, or something that would be pretty extreme, because I do believe in local control. I don't like mandates. I know the discussion all the time is, well, I don't like unfunded mandates. I don't like even funded mandates. If the state wants to do it, the state ought to step up and do it. Whether they fund it or not, it ought to be their responsibility if it's their idea. If we give you an unfunded mandate, you've got to find some way to come up with the revenue and put a program or policy in place that you may not even want to do. So that's certainly not something that we should be doing, and I expect that most of the legislature would agree with this. But let's lobby together. We certainly understand how important it is. The phrase we hear all the time is, government closest to the people is better for the people. I agree with that. Again, I've been there. I've done that. I've been with you guys in the trenches. They're trying to push back on the overreach of the state legislature. And we're having, I think, great success in doing that. It's not perfect, but I'm with you on this one.
Mr. Weinholtz?
Yes, I absolutely would be your advocate on this. The only issue that I take is your use of the word administration. I think we have far too much administration and not enough leadership. There's a big difference. There's a big difference between administration and management and leadership. And a governor has to lead out on these issues. And yes, I would use the veto pen. And I would also look into more of participation from this group on state commissions so that we can get your input, because otherwise there isn't a mechanism for it. And I know from my 30 years in business that when you have a more diverse group around the table with all the right aspects being represented, that you get much more robust discussion, you get much better representation. And so I would even go so far as to put members of this group on state commissions that were important to them, because I know the power of that from business.
Let's again go to this side of the room, and again, identify yourself and where you're from.
My name is Sonia Norton, and I am the Vernal City Mayor. I would just like to invite Mr. Weinholtz to please come out and talk with us a little bit about our public lands. We would love to visit with you about that. Mm-hmm. But my question is mainly about property tax. It's a financing tool for us in our local governments, but the amount of property tax revenue remains essentially flat. So even if the actual tax rate remains the same or lower, the tax rate from the previous year, a local government is still required to comply with truth in taxation requirements. As governor, how would you provide flexibility and sufficient revenue tools for local governments to meet the service needs of the residents that the residents expect?
Mr. Weinholtz.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I've been to Vernal a couple times in the last few months, and I apologize for not looking you up, but I will next time. You know, the truth in taxation law, you know, while it has some some positive aspects to it, especially for citizens. I realize the difficulty that it creates in tying the hands of folks like you who are responsible for providing services and always asked to do more with less. So I would look to build, and then you see situations where, because of truth in taxation laws, you have folks that are afraid to propose much needed tax increases, and then you have situations where you have to get caught up, and then all of a sudden you're talking to your citizens about a 70% tax increase because you haven't been able to do it along the way. So I would look to add flexibility in that area, and I'd want to work with you. And again, the answers are always local. I'm always looking for input from where the rubber meets the road, and I would encourage you to partner with me on that so that we can get to the right solution.
Governor Herbert.
Again, I can relate. I remember when counties didn't have even the sales tax. Unless it was developed outside in the unincorporated area, they participated in none of the sales tax revenue that was coming from retail sales in your cities. I worked with then Speaker of the House, Mel Brown. Ken will remember this, when we worked together to try to come up with a way so counties could at least have a second leg to the stool to help us with our revenue needs for the services that we, the people, want to take place in county government and city government. So I recognize, I've lived through it, I understand the problem. Truth in taxation, I think, has served us well. Put in place somewhere in the mid-1980s. It certainly, if you look at the graph, it shows that we certainly have slowed down the rise of the taxpayers' cost for property tax. The most hated tax, we all know, that there is out there is the property tax. Again, I think not only has it served us well, but it does allow us to have growth. So you have property tax with growth. You can have an exception for growth. What ought to be considered, what ought to be looked at for an adjustment to give you more flexibility, is an exception for inflation. Because if you've got enough money to pay for what you have now, plus you get growth, where you're having an erosion of your ability, your purchasing power is in inflation. So that ought to be the discussion if we want to give you more flexibility on the property tax, to say, can we in fact add back in what we've lost to purchasing power because of inflation without having to have the truth in taxation hearing? I think that would be something. That's a discussion worth having, and I think one that we can deal with. Again, I recognize the problems. I've been up here on the Hill when I was a county commissioner arguing on behalf of the counties. Nobody likes to have the property tax increase, and that's because most of our homes, what's our own domicile, it's what gives us freedom and liberty, is the right of private property. So it's a tough issue, but inflation is where we ought to address it.
Thank you for that question, for those responses. We have time for one more question from the audience over here to my right. Please say who you are.
I'm Ron Crittenden, City Councilman, Heber City. I've lived in rural areas all my life by choice. And I've heard here at the conference one of the couple of problems, Salt Lake. I mean, we're Salt Lake City, part of the cities and towns. I have a solution, I think, for both Heber City and Salt Lake City, because there weren't enough rooms here at this hotel or even downtown because of other big conventions. I got to stay out in North Salt Lake Bountiful. So I've been driving in like some of those people do every morning. I used to think the flow only came from our valley in, but I discovered it comes from all around Salt Lake in. Many years ago, I worked for Congress, and I learned about water. We became part of CUP, so we could pay taxes, so they could collect our water and send it to Salt Lake. And so everything I learned that water doesn't go downhill, it goes to money. So it goes uphill from the Uinta Basin and down into Salt Lake.
You're saying, Ron, that if you drop a nickel, it'll roll to Salt Lake City.
That's kind of what I'm saying. Even your lieutenant governor commutes in, right? I wonder if we shouldn't move the capital to Fillmore, where it started.
I know Governor Huntsman would have liked that. That's his
The solution for Salt Lake is they talk about pollution. We are a beautiful place to live up in Heber Valley, as everyone is finding out. but we don't need so many people with houses that don't pay their way, and they don't pay their way tax-wise, infrastructure. We need more businesses. We need, if he doesn't become governor, to have him move his business out to Heber. We have workers. They're all commuting to Salt Lake to work. We need businesses to support our infrastructures.
Great. So the question sounds
The
like?
question is, what as governor will you do to diminish the washout, not diminish, but give priority to businesses, not just houses, out into the outer areas, and reduce Salt Lake's pollution, give us a little of it with a business or two.
Okay. Governor, you
Me?
take that one first, yeah?
Well, that's a tough question, Ron, because I believe in free markets. And, people make decisions about where they will locate based on what's to their advantage economically. What the state of Utah has a responsibility to do is provide a very fertile environment and a soil where the entrepreneur can plant their seeds with the hopes that they'll germinate. It's a partnership. It's really all of us working together to make sure that the county, the city, and the state are creating that ambiance which is conducive to the risk taker, the wealth creator, the entrepreneur. Capital is a coward. It won't go to places it's not wanted. We've, in fact, created an environment where capital is now flowing into our state in ways it's never done before in our history. The Silicon Slopes phenomena is expanding into many other areas of our sectors of our economy: aerospace, banking, finance, life sciences, medical device. So we are seeing that take place, and it will spill into the Heber Valley. Clearly, there's the phenomena of the what we call the black hole, the Wasatch Front, where everybody comes here. We have now over 80% of our population in 4 counties, and yet we're a fast-growing state with now over 3 million people and rising rapidly. So we need to find out what you want to do in Heber Valley. We need to work with our Governor's Rural Partnership Board, our BEAR program, our other opportunities to say, what businesses can we expand or bring to there? We're just taking one down to Richfield with our aerospace, called a Pathways program, with our applied technology colleges down there to have people learn about aerospace. They get credit in school when they're seniors in high school and community college, and they will get paid on the job as they kind of explore the learning experience and say, do I want to stay in aerospace? Get paid, get skills, help with the pipeline issues that aerospace is having as a challenge here in our state right now, and taking it to rural parts of Utah. So there's probably many ways to skin the cat, but we need to have you, in fact, say, here's our dream. What can you, state, help us in accomplishing this dream?
Mr. Weinholtz, how would you skin that cat, as the governor says?
Well, I wouldn't be that violent about it. As a business leader, I know that you have to choose projects wisely and make smarter decisions with investments and incentives to bring businesses to new areas. In the knowledge economy, it almost doesn't matter where you're going to locate your business. So you're right, we can be doing a better job in developing, incentivizing new business in our rural economies. But you've got to make wise decisions, and you've got to have leadership that ensures those wise decisions. The recent Facebook debacle is a great example of a lack of leadership, a horrible deal made behind closed doors. And as I've traveled the state throughout the course of my campaigning, the one thing I hear over and over again from Republicans, Democrats, Independents, is that they've had enough of closed-door meetings with no transparency, no accountability, no public input, no input from the people, and people are fed up with that. You want to know why we have low voter turnout and why people are angry? That's why. And the Facebook deal was a great example of that. No transparency, behind closed doors, and the bitter irony was we were ready to give $260 million away in tax incentives at the same time that the Jordan School District is trying to raise $245 million on a ballot in November because it needs new schools for the 9,000 new students that are going to be coming over the next few years. So if we're going to give away money that should go to schools to the richest corporation in the world, that's like the worst example of corporate welfare that I can think of. So you've got to make wise decisions, and lead on it so that the decisions are made appropriately.
Just as I do on my radio program every day, I feel bad when I see people standing in line. I see the lines blinking on the phones, but we need to be respectful to our candidates' time. We so appreciate them being here. I've really appreciated the questions that have come from our cities and our towns and our councils and our mayors, and I thank you so very, very much. According to the coin tosses, what will happen now is we'll have a final statement from Governor Herbert, and then Mr. Weinholtz will have the last word.
Well, thank you, and thanks to the league, and thanks to all of you for being here to listen to us, give our vision of what we think the state of Utah has in store for it going forward over these next 4 years. I appreciate the opportunity I've had to work with you over these past 7 years as governor. And I appreciate even more, because I was a county commissioner and a local government official, the significant, challenging role that you face as mayors and council members in making tough decisions. We genuflect a local control, and yet we have an issue that comes up where the local people have some discussion back and forth and say, well, somebody should override that. Our incentive programs is designed to have local control and local input of the stakeholders. You'll be the ones that should decide whether it's a good deal or not for your local people that you represent, the taxpayers that are in your district. Again, the Facebook thing, it worked. It was not acceptable. People backed out. But I can tell you that as we've worked together, and it really is a matter of collaboration, not pointing fingers and saying you didn't do your part or you didn't do your part as well as I did my part. It's a matter of us collaborating and working together for the common good of the state. And as we've done this, we've become the #1 best performing economy in America today. That is a pretty remarkable outcome. Leadership, you can talk about leadership. There's people that are dynamic, people a little more demure. Leadership is about outcomes. It's about producing results. It's not about pontificating. It's not about political phraseology. It's about getting people together and getting things done. I can tell you my philosophy is I'm conservative in principle. I'm a right-of-center guy. I'm a small government. I'm not into redistribution. I'm a free market capitalist. And I'm moderate in tone. I tend not to throw bombs at people, be pejorative. I want to be respectful of other people's points of view, moderate in tone, but I'm inclusive in process. I'll sit down with anybody and say, let's see if we can work things out. And by golly, these last 7 years, not only worked them out, but we're the leading state in America today. We are the gold standard of where to live, where to work, and to do business and raise children. Thank you.
And Mr. Weinholtz, your final comments.
Sure. Well, what I've learned in talking to people is that the vibrant Utah economy isn't working for everyone. You know, it's working for people like me. It's working for business owners. It's working for the people at the top of the income scale. You know, and the high tide is supposed to lift all boats, not just the yachts. And I've been successful in my business career because of this philosophy that I talked to you about of always listening to people, putting people first, being a servant leader, and you can look that up. So this isn't just lip service that I'm giving to you about wanting to be a good partner to you. Let me tell you a little story about how my company weathered the recession. The recession landed on CHG's doorstep in 2008. And in our company, everybody in the company is on a team, including the CEO. And we asked, at that time we had about 80 teams in the company. And at that time, we asked everybody on those 80 teams to brainstorm for a couple days and come up with ideas to help us better weather the recession. Now, most companies in our industry did what all other companies did. They got their executive team in a room and they tried to come up with ways to do that. Well, it's much more powerful when you involve people. Those 80 teams that we empowered to come up to help us weather the recession came up with 1,300 unique ideas that saved us over $4 million. And I can tell you that if I was alone in my boardroom with my executive team, we wouldn't have come up anywhere near 1,300 ideas. And more important than the $4 million that we saved was the trust that we built by involving people in the process. No one was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Everyone had friends and family that were being laid off. But we talked openly and transparently about the recession, about how we were going to face it, and we are the only company in our industry that grew through the recession as a result of that collaborative approach. And that's the kind of leader and that's the kind of partner that I intend to be for you. So thank you very much.
Before we conclude and thank these candidates, let's give a round of applause to the staff that's here, the AV staff, those that have served us great food today. Please give them a round of applause.
Nice job, man. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for being here. Great job.
And now, thank you again to these terrific candidates. God bless both of you.
Thank you.